Hey Dave, how's it
All right.
going?
Just
Yeah,
a beautiful day in San Francisco.
yeah, another sunny day. Hey, I was just looking at the static pictures that people use on their Zoom, and it says a little bit about people. One of our guests today has got a picture of him wearing a soccer scarf at Anfield, which is Liverpool football ground. And Liverpool are streets ahead of everybody else in the league, Premier League, and it should be closing this month, but it got stopped. And they have been on a 20-year drought waiting for a trophy.
Uh,
So the pandemic has got in the way of them winning the league for the first time in 20 years. So
well,
watch
there's
see what
always an
happens there.
excuse, is what I heard, if we want to turn just into a talk show host on sports. So we could just make a quick pivot if you wanted.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get started. We've got some more and more people dropping in, but it's already 3:30 in San Francisco, 6:30 p.m. in New York, and 8:30 a.m. on Friday morning here in Melbourne, Australia. Welcome to episode 7 of the Supply Chain Bunker. There's been no shortage of great examples of additive manufacturing or 3D printing helping in the fight against COVID-19. So in this bunker, we're talking to a couple of execs from two companies that are really doing their part, from 3D printed nasal swabs for testing, PPE for frontline workers, to printing parts for medical devices and hospital equipment. Both Markforged and Carbon have quickly implemented impressive responses to the COVID crisis. So what I want to do with these guys is explore the role of additive manufacturing in the current pandemic and how the digital approach makes it ideal for rapid product development and deployment. So we'll explore the urgent demand of how supply chain and supply and demand are matched and ensure parts get quickly manufactured and deployed where they need to be. But we'll also look at the broader role of 3D printing in the global manufacturing ecosystem and what's changing and what's likely to drive a greater deployment in multiple industries. Our two guests are Brian Painter, who is the Vice President and GM of the Americas region at Markforged. He joined Markforged as employee 92 and has led the company's go-to-market and global expansion, taking the company to well over 250 employees and growing orders by 300%. Philip DeSimone is joining us as well. He's the Chief Customer Officer at Carbon and was part of the founding team at Carbon in 2013. He's responsible for customer success, retention, and acquisition, as well as managing their impressive strategic relationships and customers like Ford, BMW, Adidas, and Riddell. In 2016, Philip was a Forbes 30 under 30, and he's been extensively featured and published in various different magazines. So a couple of great guests, really looking forward to having those guys on. But before we get started with the debate and get these rock stars of the additive industry on stage, I just wanted to cover a few headlines that caught my eye as we've gone through this week. We're seeing more and more consideration given to the post-COVID world and the post-COVID-19 supply chain and manufacturing ecosystems and what that might look like as people grapple with the new norms. And there's been a few surveys done over the last month or so. PwC published a survey from CFOs, 300 plus CFOs. And the big thing that came out of that was a desire for supply chain diversity in the wake of the pandemic, but actually a limited number talking about relocating completely, suggesting that might be a last resort. 56 plan to find alternative and additional sourcing options as a reaction to COVID-19. And the other things that come out are an increasing desire to improve digital tools, visibility for supply chain management, and to be better able to model and manage risk. We always get some great insight from our guests on here, and one of our guests on last week's show pinged me a great headline from Wired magazine, a really interesting article entitled "As Workers Spread Out to Halt the Virus, Robots Fill the Gap." And it's a really interesting piece about how social distancing requires people to rethink the layouts of their workspaces and how this new breed of cobots are helping to keep those factories and warehouses running. The auto space continues to step up. The latest partnership I've seen there is from Dynaflow and from Honda. converting part of their technical center in Ohio to make ventilators, and using Dynaflow technology to do that. And let's not forget that disruption happens all the time. I know this is a huge event, but I did a really interesting interview with an exec this week who was telling me about their factory in Boise, Idaho, that had an earthquake in the middle of the pandemic. So they got everybody back, social distance, earthquake hit, and they had to evacuate the building and do all the structural engineering and restart the whole thing. So yeah, disruption's kind of a fact of life, and it's not just unique to this instance. So Dave, what's caught your eye this week? What's been vexing you and keeping you busy?
Yeah, thanks. And I love the updates, Phil. Like I said, it's my afternoon cup of coffee. So appreciate the insights there. You know, I think for us from an operating perspective, and I'm really excited to have, you know, both just really strong operators with Phil and Brian joining. But I think that we're having a lot of conversations at Fictiv today around basically like, how do we get back to business? And you know, we're seeing actually in the last couple of weeks of April here in the manufacturing sector that folks are really getting back to it. You know, a lot of people had talked about that the manufacturing industry would be one of the first to rise, and in a lot of ways, you know, I think that the manufacturing industry has been able to plug some critical gaps in supply chain, and additive plays a huge role there. I think on the flip side, what we've been talking a lot about, because we talk to so many different customers, is the impact of layoffs to a lot of businesses that we work with every day has been immense. You know, we're almost at Great Depression levels in terms of the amount of unemployment in the United States. And this is having a toll on a lot of different folks. And one of the interesting things we've been talking about internally is this model around grievance. That's the Kegler-Ross model. That's all around these 7 different stages of shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. It's basically these 7 steps of grievance that happens. And really that maybe yourself and the majority of folks, let's say in the manufacturing space, might be in the acceptance area, that they're like, hey, this is the new norm. I have a way forwards. We can really help. But as you're talking to customers and other people in industry or other industries, they might still be in denial and not realizing it, or in a state of depression and not figuring out how to get out. And so I think part of the reminder, you know, while I have everyone's attention here, is to be kind to one another. I think that that there's a lot of different states that people are in this moment. And so I think we're in a unique position in the manufacturing world, but also within additive and supply chain and digital space to really help and to push through this grievance stage. But, you know, there's a lot of folks hurting across the US and the world. And remembering that, I think is important. And we're unique in this bunker that we have folks in many different time zones. Brian's going to be joining us from New York. I'm in San Francisco, as is Phil as well. And then, you know, Phil, I know you're in a completely different time zone. So just wanted to share that perspective. We talk about geographic resilience and digital trends in manufacturing, that there's really a human element to this, and that's important for all of us to remember.
Yeah, and I think that definitely comes out from the bunker. And I think you know, that kind of asking for help, that offering of help, that communication's huge. I've interviewed maybe 7 or 8 CEOs in the last couple of weeks, and asked pretty much the same questions. What advice would you give to peers? And what comes up consistently is communication, collaboration, and leadership seems to come from that constant communication. And a lot of people are saying actually their communication cadence and their communication with their team is better than it's ever been, and they're learning from that, and there's stuff they're going to keep from that. And I think, like you say, we are a little bit isolated in the manufacturing world, because we've been spurred on by what needs to be done rather than dwelling on some of the problems, because there is so much opportunity for manufacturing and supply chain, and particularly additive manufacturing, to help. So it's, you know, it's been awesome to be involved in that.
I think what's so great is, and we'll talk about it today on the show, but additive has really been at the forefront of pushing digital manufacturing and transformation. And we'll get into this with our 2 guest speakers, but the way that these companies have built basically remote manufacturing capabilities,
Yeah.
monitoring networks on a global scale. This really is the future path of manufacturing, and how we think about supply chain. And so maybe let's use that as a chance to
Yeah,
bring on.
let's bring in, yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. Let's bring in Philip DeSimone from Carbon first. I've always seen Additive as the kind of poster child for digital transformation. And I think you agree with that. Philip, would you agree that Additive is kind of the poster child for the digital transformation of manufacturing? And just give us a little bit of a flavor of Carbon and what you've been doing over the last couple of months at the same time.
Absolutely. And I first want to thank you both for having me, both Dave and Philip. Philip, great name, and also spelled correctly.
There you go. We got two of us got that one right.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, so just a little bit about myself, and then I'll hop into the conversation. Obviously, my name's Phil, and the CCO of Carbon, so Chief Customer Officer. Really what that means is I'm sort of am responsible for all of our customer engagements, so go-to-market functions. And I believe I have one of the best jobs on earth, because I get to work with all the companies that you've loved with since you were a kid, as well as new industries that if you asked me, 7 years ago when we started the company, whether I would have had to become an expert in, like oral health, I would have told you were crazy. I don't even like going to the dentist. So it's definitely been a great ride. And I think from my perspective, very similar to the way you started the conversation, this COVID pandemic, I believe, was actually a shining moment for Additive to come back into the picture about the power and capability that it actually has. Mm-hmm. Historically, we've talked about centralized production, right? China built an entire economy on it. And, I think nowadays we've talked about the decentralization of manufacturing, and it's been slow. You have times where it makes sense, and then you have times where it doesn't make sense. And right now, particularly with the pandemic, I believe that it has been a huge opportunity to show really the power of this technology as a whole globally. And it's not just here in the United States, it's everywhere. And getting the ability of having instant manufacturing is huge. And we were seeing this in the efforts that we started working on with PPE, and started doing with swabs. And we never actually thought that PPE was going to be an actual business. It was never supposed to be a long-term business, right? I want to get back to printing the things that I'm used to printing. Yeah. But it was our responsibility to help bridge, create that stopgap that was missing in society. We were waiting for traditional manufacturing to catch up so that we take over. Now, luckily, I think we're starting to see it catch up, and the PPE needs are starting to decline, at least from what we've seen as of right now. But we played an important role. There's not many people that can say at a drop of a hat, we validated, built up a supply chain, and printed a 250,000 face shields across the network within a span of weeks. And
can you talk about what that was like, Phil? Like, first off, I love your background. Amazing, by the way. It looks so dark. I really just want to give you a flower to lighten up your room. But, I'd love to know.
Some bunkers are nicer than other bunkers.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I have beautiful phones behind me that I can pick up at any moment. But, I'd love to know, what was it like to be inside of the walls of Carbon when that decision was made? When it was like, hey, we can help here. We can make 250,000 devices in the drop of a bucket. Like, how did it come about? And maybe talk through what it was like.
It actually didn't take long to make the decision. It actually was made pretty quickly, and Ellen Coleman led the charge from our side, and her view was that and like everyone else, we just wanted to do our part to help. You were talking about the pain that people are seeing right now and suffering through with loss of jobs, but prior to that being a thing, the thing was we all had loved ones that were on the front lines that the hospitals could not get them protection. And yet they were still doing their job. And, I think what it comes down to is, what can you do? What can you do immediately? What can you do to help? I mean, we started looking across everything. We started calling our local hospitals, whether it be Stanford or Kaiser or Banner Health, and started going, what can we do to help provide to you? And also at the same time, what can we do that's actually real and effective? There were a lot of people early on, trying to print N95 masks and doing stuff that was really out beyond the capability of the technology. And, we wanted to make sure we were doing something to help, not to do something to create a bigger issue. So, that's always one of the problems. But, I'm really proud of the team. We had engineers that stopped designing the next printer and started designing the next most easily efficient made face shield. And then our supply chain people, instead of, sourcing our parts, moved over to starting to source PET because there was a shortage of that. And so, we started throwing our supply chain expertise behind it and delivering full product. And, it was one of the most proud moments you could ever have. And in the grand scheme of things, it was a small blip compared to the overall need and compared to what everyone else did collectively. But when you look back at this 20, 30, 40 years from now, you want to be able to say that you did your part, that you didn't sit on the sideline and wait for something to help. And that was the easiest decision of all to get in. And, even on the swab side, I think what was interesting is, I'll never forget this, Rick Fulop called Joe and I on March 17th. Mm-hmm. Hey guys, we think that you're one of the only ones that can help us solve this problem. Joe and I didn't really even know what swabs were. We started looking at it, and within 3 weeks, we were, actually even shorter than that, within weeks, we were in IRB trials at hospitals, starting to take specimen, and now we're making over 100,000 of them a week, awesome. And growing it across the entire supply chain. So for us, it was really an easy decision.
Yeah. And I'm curious, when you did on both of those projects, how many printers in how many different locations were you deploying? Because part of this, this benefit of additive isn't just like there's a printer over in the corner, I can use that. It's what can I do directly with my CAD file and deploy that to printers all over the place.
Power of the network, yeah.
Yeah. So I think this was really the power of the decentralized production capability.
Yeah.
And we've got, hundreds of printers across the United States. And of course, all the customers want to help too, right? Everyone can hop in. And from large companies to small mom and pop businesses, everyone was wanting to help. And so what we tried to do was give them all a standard capability that they were all able to print and get the same results, and then help them with the supply chain to help deliver, as well as help them with the demand. I mean, I think, the interesting thing is there's a lot of people out there that were making things, and the hospitals just had no way to get it. They have small procurement office teams too. And, it was one of those things where it was really a team-based effort. And, it was anyone who was willing to. We didn't push anyone, but there were way more people interested in doing it than people thought. And, I think it was really amazing and a touching moment to see everyone chip in and help.
And just to be able to connect to that network so quickly is I think what's really powerful when we look forward to what a post-COVID-19 manufacturing ecosystem and supply chain should look like. And I don't want to get into that immediately. We should definitely get into that a little bit later. Maybe it's a good time to bring in Brian and get a feel for what Brian's been doing. Our next guest is Brian Painter. Brian is from Markforged. Brian, come and join us. Give us a brief introduction and tell us a little bit about your recent COVID-19 experiences.
And your bunker, please. Actually, I think that's
and your awesome bunker.
The first trivia question is if you can put in the chat where his background is from. There's a prize at the end.
I won't mention it. See if anybody can get it. But thank you, Dave and Philip, for having me on. I appreciate appreciate you inviting me out. Like they said, my name is Brian Painter. I'm the Vice President General Manager of the Americas region for Markforged. I look after all of our go-to-market functions for Markforged in this region. No, it's I echo a lot of what Philip from Carbon Set was saying. I think what's impressed me most is just the collective 3D printing / additive manufacturing community has really rallied together to help provide what we could when we could and as fast as we could to help our first responders and the hospital systems and so on and so forth respond to better our position against the fight for people's lives. And I think that's a really rewarding experience that I've gotten from being a part of the response to COVID. Specifically with Markforged, I mean, we're an industrial 3D printing manufacturer, right? We focus primarily on the industrial space, albeit a different segment than Carbon focuses on, where we're dealing with large manufacturers, that need industrial grade strength and performance from their applications that they're using. So for us to get into the response for COVID for things like PPE and swabs and things like that was kind of new ground for us. And what impressed me the most was how quickly we came up and open sourced the face shield option for the people with our printers to print for their local communities. And then once we had that design down, the engineers at Markforged pivoted to come up with a nasal swab design. What was really interesting and what I think talks about the power of additive, we partnered with UCSD and the Rady School, the Rady Children's Hospital out of San Diego. And basically iterated across 50 different prototypes in a 36-hour period to come up with a final swab design that we then put through IRB testing at Rady. And I think, from, design or idea to part, you're inside of 36 hours and we were going to clinical trials with IRB testing.
That's so incredible. I know you guys have so many different solutions as well, Brian. And so how do you think about kind of across those different solution sets? Was there a specific material or technology you guys went to for this? Or, like you said, that you have so much industrial focus.
So I don't think we stopped to really think about the other side of this, like, hey, we're an industrial company, like we shouldn't do this. I think it was back to Philip's point from earlier. It was more like, how do we help, right? And it was, we can print all this stuff. So how do we help? And in some of our materials that we manufacture, we have a nylon as well as a composite material that is just fine for basic use applications. It's like any other composite or plastic type of material in terms of strength and stuff like that. And then obviously we have the strength stuff, which is what Markforged is known for. But as it relates to this project, they're like, well, we can do this, we can figure this out. And we had a couple of engineers that had a couple doctor friends that said, hey, we need, swabs for testing. And next thing you know, we're in the swab business. And it was less about like, should we? And it's more like, like, how do we help?
Can we, and are we going to do it? But I think that's the beauty of additive, right? Is that, you can be in one vertical or you can be focused over here on industrial, but really the agility that additive provides, I think it allows you to jump like that. And, I know Markforged has just been known for the strength, but it doesn't mean you have to just build components, I think, in that space.
Yeah. And obviously from our, from our perspective, we're up to manufacturing. Phil mentioned a good number. I think our range is right around, 90 to about 110,000, depending on the yield from the different printer fleet. But again, what we're also moving to now is how do we open source this so that other people outside can take advantage who own Markforged printers, right?
Yeah.
We shouldn't be the bottleneck in getting these applications into end customers and patients' hands, right? So that they can get benefit from it. And really
That's
it's,
the
you
power
know,
of the network.
yeah, exactly. And it's really about, hey, how do we make sure that this is safe, and that people don't get injured, you know, but, you know, and it can follow the design guides and so on and so forth. But the end goal is obviously to get it out into more people's hands so that that more people can benefit from it.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I think that's huge. And the response from the whole additive industry, I think, has been super impressive and collaborative and communicative. And I think that's great. If you look at the other parts of the COVID-19 disruption, like the workplace issues, you know, social distancing, how has that impacted you guys? Perhaps Philip, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think it's different based upon the states. I mean, so it's really all over the map. I mean, obviously, as Dave knows better than anyone, California has cracked down really, really hard, and you know, we support our governor, and you know, we've been able to get been allowed to go in the office to do work on COVID-related products, or what we believe is essential businesses.
Yeah.
Our medical device businesses, as you can imagine, you know, keep going on. But you know, we converted pretty much the factories that were being used here in the Bay Area that were being used for printing midsoles or printing helmets for Audi and Riddell over to full-time printing for this cause, because we couldn't do anything else with it, and there was a huge amount of capacity there. And so, you know, we've been working with local state officials about how best to do it, making sure that we're following the rules and guidelines. And you know, it's obviously new for everybody. And so now, I mean, I think the big thing now is really, and we don't know yet when we're going to be allowed to fully go back to the office. We know obviously it's going to be different. And so as somebody who's responsible for, you know, close to 500 employees, the real big turn goes to, okay, how do we get back into the office safely, thoughtfully? And so we've been spending a tremendous amount of time thinking through that as a leadership team. What are the required functions? What are the necessary functions? And what functions, frankly, like me as a sales guy, I just need a computer and a phone. It doesn't matter really where I am. But, you know, people that are doing materials R&D, you know, it's really, really tough. People doing installations of machines, it's getting really, really hard. You know,
is that same thing true for you, Brian? Like, just, are you having to work with customers and how to think about, you know, how their strategy is of leveraging your machines in a remote fashion? I mean, I imagine there's capabilities, but it's still challenging.
Yeah, so we just had a similar update to our board of directors on how we were going to come back online, and how the impact was going to change the support models and stuff like that. So what's interesting is because you know, our composite printers are very mobile. Like, you can pick one up, put it in your, you know, passenger seat and take it home with you. A lot of engineers actually have done that, is like take the printers home. And we have seen a fairly consistent in terms of utilization on the printers, as well as material consumption on our composite printers have not tailed off like you would think they would, because they're not in the office. The metal printing process, though, obviously is very much an office driven / manufacturing facility driven. So we've seen, you know, obviously consumption of and print utilization go down there. But yeah, in terms of, you know, sales and stuff like that, and you know, if you got to go on site to install a metal printer at a manufacturing facility and you can't get on site, you know, that's obviously a problematic scenario. I think from a manufacturing point of view, because we manufacture our own filaments, that was we were deemed essential services by the state of Massachusetts. We're headquartered in Boston. So we were allowed to continue operations, but we've locked down our manufacturing facility that manufactures our filament. And like, you know, you have to have approval from our CEO to even get access to the building. Wow. So we locked that down completely and went into a 24/7, 360, you know, type of scenario for manufacturing.
Yeah. And for us, ours isn't mobile. So, you know, our printers weigh, you know, 500, 600 pounds, or industrial based.
I can lift it, Phil. Don't worry, you know.
Yeah, I know.
It's a good workout.
But for us, one of the main advantages we have is just our printers are connected and they're on a network, and so because they each spit out 1 million data points a day, because the background architecture, they're able to be used pretty quickly and efficiently, but they had to get permission to get in to gain access to the majority of them across the United States.
So what about filaments from your point of view? And it's actually, Brian mentioned it, but it's a question that came in from the audience. How resilient is the filament supply chain, and how's that been disrupted, and what innovations are occurring to de-risk that?
So we use liquid chemistry, so they're not filament based, but our materials are a lot of our suppliers have been deemed essential. So we have had no issues getting our resins, nor have we had issues getting these, and they're made decentralized globally for us, and the components come from a lot of the major manufacturers, and we just haven't seen an issue with that yet.
How about for you, Brian? I know we've talked about this a little bit. It's a bit different for the filament side and carbon fiber for you guys.
Yeah, the base filament that we source is our proprietary blend, and we have multiple points of redundancy in it, but it is a proprietary blend that we contract for specifically, and it's part of our IP. So it's been, we haven't seen an issue yet because, again, to Philip's point, we've been deemed critical services, and the supply chain behind us has been deemed essential services. We've helped in that as well, in terms of with the different governing bodies in the states that we source from, where those facilities are. But yeah, it's an ongoing effort that we need to constantly keep our eye on, because it could become an issue. I'll give you one example of something that we had to work through. We source one of our parts for one of our printers from China normally, and we had to find, and when they went into lockdown in the beginning of February, we had to source that part. We had to find alternative source for that part, and we did. It's a pretty straightforward swap out, but again, it was one of those things where you get to understand how fragile your supply chain is in situations like this very quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're a consumer of the supply chain, but you've got a role to play in the supply chain. And I'm curious, when you think about, and we've had this discussion about all kinds of manufacturing, but when you think about additive manufacturing, does it matter where it is in the world? Can you literally pick up a bunch of printers from China and move them to the US and print just as competitively there? How does that dynamic work, and how's that being impacted by people's current view?
In what sense, Phil? Like, are you saying picking, like if we have printers in China? Or... Yeah,
I mean, people seem to be reviewing their manufacturing geography at the moment and kind of rethinking where stuff is being made, and dependence on supply chains. That's the issue you had. But when you look at that from an additive point of view, is it actually pretty easy to redeploy manufacturing from one country to another? And is additive easier to do that with than other technologies?
From my opinion, I would say it's much easier because you don't have, because of the flexibility of what you can produce on these, on any additive platform, and the relative simplicity of picking it up. You don't have to retool a line. You don't have to, your line is essentially whatever your printing platform is, right?
Yeah.
And you can produce it anywhere you have access to that printing platform, right? And the flexibility of additive allows you to produce whatever you want from a geometry point of view. So you have that complete design freedom. So if you wanted to produce XYZ part today and ABC part tomorrow, that's one of the beauties of additive. And whether you produce it in Hungary, Italy, China, or the United States, it doesn't really matter.
Canada.
Yeah, okay, Canada. There you go. I noticed that. I noticed that that accent you have there, Dave.
I know, Phil, for you guys at Carbon, I mean, you guys are known for the large partnerships and kind of mass scale. I don't know if you're wearing one of your Adidas shoes right now, but you don't have to show us your feet.
I'm nervous about standing up.
Yeah, because you're not wearing pants. I know that that's true, but we're gonna keep it above board here. But maybe, you know, let's talk about that idea that you guys produce at volume.
Yeah. I was going to say it really depends on the size and scale of what you're trying to do. You know, the funny thing is I think we have a unique position because of some of the volume at which we do a lot of printing of. And when you get to scale and size of millions, it becomes the benefits of additive start to dwindle. And you know, you end up getting actually into a very centralized view even then. So, you know, we obviously do our work with, and what Dave was pointing out was our work with Additive, which is the largest application in the world by a long shot, total volume and total number of machines. And those are actually very, very much centrally located. I mean, there's a factory with 100, you know, hundreds of them in them and printing out millions of souls a year. And when you get to that scale, when you're working on efficiencies and cost downs, it's really hard to do that decentralized. Now, that being said, creating a second factory is much, much easier, right? You don't have the same CapEx expenditure. You don't have the same, you know, bring up that you would necessarily have. I'm not saying it's you know, a blink of an eye easy. There's still work to do it, but it is way easier than traditional technologies. And so when this started happening and China really, the factory started shutting down, it actually worked quite well for us because a lot of the big manufacturers that we're helping supply and support started stamping repeat factories in other geolocations to start building out, you know, what I would say a mitigation strategy. Because I mean, remember, China started seeing this in early December, and we were having a tough time getting our customers filled because the factories were straight up shut down. And you know, it was interesting. I think from that perspective, we actually knew something big was going to happen a little bit sooner than everyone else did, and I think everyone else in the manufacturing space saw the same thing. And because you started seeing a little bit more panic coming out of the supply chain folks. And overall, look, I think when you're doing tens of thousands of things, yes, the greatness of additive holds true all the way through. You can do it decentralized. You can put a printer anywhere you want, no matter whether it's in Iowa, in Idaho, or in New York City.
Come on, Canada, we said it.
Canada.
And
don't forget those printers in Toronto.
And you're going to be able to produce parts. And, you know, but I think that is still a little bit where traditional manufacturing still can come through and be, you know, if you need to make, you know, 1 billion face shields, there's no better way to do it than injection molding. It might take them a long time to do it, but once they get going, it's really, really good.
Well, let's, I mean, this is the classic debate, right? And I want to hear from both of you guys on this around what the volumes and kind of use cases are. You know, one of the things that I love is that, you know, for Fictiv, we're pretty platform or technology agnostic, but I think carbon plays a very different role than Markforged does. And so I'm just curious on each of your opinion, and maybe Brian, we'll start with you. Do you think additive is an end use solution for high volumes, or do you think that there's specific verticals, you know, that are volume cases we should focus on? Like what's your positioning there?
It depends on the application, right? I think it's so application dependent. To Philip's point, injection molding, if you need to do it in the, you know, hundreds of thousands of millions, you're going to be, you know, it's going to be a better use than say an additive platform. But when you look at it from, you know, when I talk to customers, I talk about right tool, right job, right? It depends on the job you're trying to do, and the tool that you would apply to that job, right? And then subsequently the requirements to be successful, right? So for us, you know, the best use cases are low volume, high mix type of applications, right? For Markforged, you know, that sub 10,000 pieces, you know, is like a real wheelhouse that needs strength, that need a great surface finish and accuracy. That is where Markforged technology really is applicable today. And just like, I liken this industry to, if you think back to 2000, you know, the 2000s, and how the compute evolved in the world, right? Going from, you know, mainframes to client server, so on and so forth. And when you think about that, you know, cell phones, there's more power in your cell phone than there was on the space shuttle, right? Back when it first launched. That same process is going to happen in this industry from my perspective. And you're going to see over time, you know, Carbon's going to innovate on their platform. We're going to innovate on our platform, and everybody wants faster, bigger, more volume, right? That's just the way people are, and the industry is, right? So we're going to continually push that envelope, and it's going to be an evolution over time, because at the end of the day, people are still going to want the lowest cost per part. And whatever way they can get that, and whatever process they're going to use, it still comes down to the price per part.
Yeah. So it's application specific. How about
for us? Yeah.
You know, how have you guys approached it? Because I think you span both spectrums.
We see it on both sides. I think the key point and what Brian was brought up is actually the correct thing. It is application specific. I think we view it a little bit of a slight difference, which is really around value creation too. And you know, price cost will always be there. If you can injection mold it, or you can do it on another technology, you will always be competing on price. It just is that way. It's sort of the animal. And then, you know, you look at that application and you say, okay, based upon certain volume levels, that might make sense. It might not. And Dave, you see this come through your platform all the time, probably too. I think the thing where we start to see where volume doesn't really matter, or price doesn't really matter, is if you can provide a performance advantage that nobody else can do. Like that's really like what you see like with the Additive stuff. And this is one of the Riddell pads. I don't know if you see it too well here. Well, you know, this structure across the helmet has 150,000 unique struts. You cannot make it any other way. And oh, by the way, it provides a performance advantage that no one else can even come close to. And if you actually look at the NFL just came out with their most recent rankings of the top helmets, and we swept the top 3 spots.
Wow.
And you know, and that is a statement, it's not as cheap as foam. Right. The price of foam is determined by the price of gasoline that morning. It's a commodity of commodities.
But I love this idea that you're saying that's like, I found an application, it is foam, and wherever foam exists where you need a better performance, it's like we will sweep the entire board.
That's correct. And so, I mean, so our view has always been, where can we find a competitive advantage that nobody else can do? And that's where we're going to dominate it. And foam was that thing. If foam was your performance component and used for the main, you know, sort of piece, the value added piece of your product, you need to come talk to us. Whether you're making saddles at Specialized or Cell, or whether you're making shoes, or whether you're making helmets, or whether you're making car seats, or whether you're making, you know, child car seats, automotive car seats, everything in below. We felt that was the market that we could make a dominance, where price wasn't as important. I mean, it's important still, but they care more about the performance. And if you can give me a 50% improvement over the performance severity score index, I can sell it, you know, and that was the perspective that we took. And then volume doesn't matter. But if you're doing things that can be done another way, then price becomes really important. And, you know, we do those things too, don't get me wrong, but you know, it's a much tougher, longer road.
They're hard.
Than traditional.
They're harder to do. But what you've got on top of that, Phil, is you've got that layer of mass customization as well. So as well as being able to create other performance, you've got the ability to make 1,000 and every one of them different in the same time that it takes to make 1,000, every one the same. Brian, do you see that as one of the things that helps you drive adoption? It's actually, you know, in your case, it's strength, it's stability, it's those kind of things. Is that performance driving adoption?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we released the latest material we did, which was copper. You know, to Phil's point, copper is a really hard metal to work with.
It sinks, man. So hard.
It's super hard to, and our engineers figured out a way to print copper and take it through this, you know, the whole sintering process, because it's super, the ability to put cooling channels and things like that into into these different welding applications and different heat sinks and heat exchangers and things like that was from Phil's point, was from a performance point of view, it blew it away. And then if you can get the material performance on par or better, it's just a home run. And then being able to rapidly redesign is in a material like that is a very complex effort. And again, I think from our point of view, you're finding these applications and these use cases like that are just home runs, and copper was a big reason we went down that road for all the reasons I just mentioned.
I couldn't even tell you how many times at Fictiv, how many heat sinks that we have made, and just the prototyping that goes into it, where people are printing in, plastic materials just to try and get geometry done. And then they're moving to, maybe metal printing certain ones, but you're not getting the surface finish that you need. Then you go and machine it so that you get something. But everything we talk about at Fictiv is how do you de-risk design decisions? And it's all around, if I can de-risk through shorter development cycles, that's beneficial. And I think there's a lot of gaps today where, additive hasn't been able to truly de-risk because you're not getting a like material, in the process. It's kind of like a kind of fits, if you will. And I think that you guys, sounds like you really closed the gap on some of those.
Yeah, and industrial applications, right, have a lot of different material characteristic requirements, which, when you introduce a new process, like if you were to put something on a car or like that is a functional part, or you put something on an airplane, those types of the detail that goes into it and the understanding of the process behind it, it's so vast and it's so extensive that when you introduce a new process, that complexity comes right along with that new process, right?
I think Phil is smiling over there because he's like, automotive process.
No, I mean, look, I completely agree. I mean, look, those organizations are there to prevent new materials from going on.
And you have an ex-CEO of Ford on your guys' board.
Look, we had, Alan Mullally was a Ford CEO. He's on our board. They were one of the first people with a printer, and it still took them 4 years to get a part on. And
there you go.
And now it's been great since then. It's been increasing, collectively. But as you point out, and I just want to come back to this, it's all about the materials. It does not matter what printer you have, what technology you have. I don't care how big it is. I don't care how small it is. If you don't have the material to do the application, it does not matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the whole mantra that we've come on. And actually, it's one of the things that I've admired about Mark Forge as well. I think I think collectively even though we don't really play too much in each other's fields, we're both some of the two companies that really invested heavily in our own materials development and controlling our own destiny there. And that was a huge thing. A lot of other companies rely on BASF and these big chemical companies. And, there's a big push for open platforms. But to be frank with you, those big companies do not care until you're shipping things in tanker cars. They're not going to give you the R&D or the pay, the time of day to go do it. And, we built an R&D team where it's one of the biggest teams we have. Develop our own materials, develop it from scratch, and then go to the big chemical companies to make it at a large scale. Much better relationship.
So sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I was just gonna say, one of the things is we look to, we had Siemens as one of our early investors, and we leverage a lot of Siemens, material scientist work and stuff like that, because they do a ton of material development, right, for all across different industries. And it's, we get to leverage that as part of our, as having them as investors. And, the amount of work that goes into what Phil was saying around material development, so that you can get to a level that is going to meet the specifications on these different applications is the majority of work that goes into it. And then extruding it out of a nozzle, in our case, is the easy part.
Yeah, it kind of feels like materials are, a big part of the challenge. They create a big part of the opportunity, and they're a bit of a barrier for deployment all at the same time. So when you talk to people, they're concerned about, material performance, material costs, because that plays so much into it. Are we at a stage where there's sufficient material development and sufficient new materials coming out that will push additive over this tipping point?
And maybe if
Or
I
is
can
there
just
still
add
a
on
lot to do?
top before you guys take that, do you think that the material development is a responsibility of a Carbon or a Mark Forged?
Yeah.
What do you think we'll actually see is the maturity of systems has grown so much, I would say, in the last 5 years because of what you all and your companies have done? Do you think that there's actually more opportunity for people just to be material companies to leverage your platform? What do you think, Phil? Maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah. Look, we have always been open to materials, people coming with materials, and so our platform is not closed. We have always taken a semi-open approach. Look, we don't want our customers to have that. One of the big issues is, as other people can tell you, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in this world, and particularly when it comes to material performance and the data they show. And, if you go pull down our data sheets about our materials, we provide everything openly in detail. And, there's a lot of people that only show certain specs, but then they don't show, how does it perform the same way after sitting on a shelf for 3 days?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things missing. And so our view has always been to bring forward game-changing materials. And if somebody else brought something that's better than what we've got, or a gap that's unique, we would bring it into the platform, and that's been our approach. I think at this point we have yet to see the investment in that space, and I think it's because it's hard. The material supply chain is actually one of the most expensive pieces of our entire supply chain. The printer is actually relatively easy, but bringing a new material to market, it takes a lot of capital, and as everyone on here knows, raising VC money to be a materials company,
that's
really
tough racket, man.
Like good luck.
But that's kind of what you guys have done. You're like, hey, we are Carbon, we're a materials company. I happen to make this machine, but it's kind of like, not that you've tricked the VC community. I hope no VC. But in some ways,
the business model was the key piece for the VC investment. I mean, the business model was the huge piece, which was around the subscriptions on the hardware and consistency in revenue, and it was, I like to think if we would have led with materials, I would have been laughed out of Sequoia's offices. So we led with the fully vertically integrated approach. Software, hardware, materials in unison, all of them being important. All brought together with a key business model, and that was sort of one of the things that drove it.
How about for you, Brian? Like, what do you think on the materials front? And
what do you consider Mark Forged to be? A materials company, a hardware company, a service company?
We're a platform company, very similar to what Philip was talking about. It's the combination of materials, purpose-built materials, being printed on our printers, and then managed through our cloud software platform, right? That allows us to deliver the quality and accuracy and strength to our customers. The materials is a really interesting thing, and I think it's more prevalent for us on the metal side than it is on the composite side, because our composite use cases primarily are focusing on not on end use parts, meaning we're not printing 1 million of these things for consumers, as an example. We're really focused on our composite technologies, on tooling, fixturing, low volume, high mix type of industrial applications. On the metal side is where on the material point becomes interesting, because the process itself is based on metal injection molding, right? So there are hundreds of different MIM powders that you could potentially use in a process like ours. So we've launched an offering called Material as a Service, where if you come to us with a MIM powder, we will take it through our binding process, bind it up, and start iterating on it for you, and be able to see if it's a viable powder to be able to be printed. So again, it's putting a onus back into our customers' hands to bring innovation to us, and then we'll help them operationalize it through our process. And again, that's more specific to the metal process, just because it's based on metal injection molding. So theoretically, any MIM powder can be put through this process.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, again, it's it's definitely about the materials, and materials, materials drive applications, which drive, usage,
adoption.
Right? And adoption, right?
Yeah. And that drives machine sales, and that drives service sales, and
absolutely,
that builds the whole ecosystem. No materials, no business. So when you look at it in the future state of the manufacturing ecosystem, and Dave, you can comment on this a little bit, and then I want to quickly segue into today's takeaways. But where do you see additive in there? Is it having that as an option within a platform, so you can choose the right tool each time?
Yeah, I'll start. In this, I think additive plays a key role and is where all the R&D and development is going. I mean, the advancements. If you think back to you have a 3D, you have a MakerBot on the cover of Wired, 2013 or 2012. We can talk like some pinnacle there. But if you think about from that period to maybe the last 5 years, the amount of hardcore R&D, like I'm not talking about building an XYZ axis to go print some PLA parts. To be able to do copper, or to be able to produce, what did you say, 100,000 swabs a week on a carbon machine, or that I can wear a helmet now in the NFL that is better than anything else. Like, holy shit. I mean, like, seriously, that is real engineering that's gone on. So I think the advancements in additive is so exciting from a materials perspective. That's a big takeaway, is how do we track that trend? But I still think if you zoom out and say in a global ecosystem of supply chain, additive is still a single drawer that you need to have in your arsenal. And that any company that doesn't have additive as a drawer, a tool chest drawer, they're really missing, I think, a big piece of how you develop and bring products to market.
I couldn't agree with Dave more. That, and the challenge that at least I see is that I don't even think it's in a lot of people's toolboxes yet still.
Oh, I agree.
In their mental toolbox. And that actually, for me now, the biggest switch over, and Dave and I have chatted about this, and I'm sure Brian probably has chatted about this in his four walls as well, is really coming down to education.
Yep.
I believe we now need to focus solely on education. And Alan Mullaly actually told us this 3 years ago, and we didn't really think anything of it at the time. Now it's clear is, your biggest challenge at some point is going to be is how you train 100,000 engineers to design for additive and take advantage of it. And frankly, that is the next step. Otherwise, we will always be in this spot where we are not in that toolbox, and we need to be in the toolbox in order to survive.
And if you design for additive, you're not a replacement technology. You're an application, right?
Platform. Yeah.
Yep. And that's couldn't be more spot on. The biggest barrier for adoption for us is understanding how to design for the process, which is the whole reason we launched Markforged University about a year ago. Mm-hmm. Is to be in a position where we can train the next, these engineers and retool these engineers, no pun intended, to be additive manufacturing engineers.
I think that was intended, by the
way. Maybe it was, but you get that was one of the genesis of Markforged University, was going out and making sure that we had a training arm so that we could do these implementations and they could get value out of this deployment.
Yeah. So let's do a quick round to see any additional takeaways before we wrap up. We've got about a minute left to go. For me, a couple of the key things: right tool, right job. I think that's hugely important. Print anywhere. I think that's a huge advantage of additive. Actually, printing in different locations, different geographies. That's a bit of a big deal now. Price does still drive decisions, sad but true. And as long as that price is matched in with total cost of ownership, so not just the number for the component, that makes sense. And the ecosystem platform is absolutely key. It can't be about printer. It can't be about material. It can't be just about software. It's all of it. Phil, what about you? Give me your quick takeaways for our guests.
Yeah, my big thing for the guests is if folks on here that are engineers, start the groups, be the voice of 3D printing in your organization. You might be treated as a black, sort of black sheep originally, but I will tell you what, every single one of my customers that I've worked with that they've gone and made one of these applications go forward are now have gotten promoted to directors or VPs
become
now.
heroes.
And they've become heroes. And we just launched an additive campaign today called our Additive MVP. And what it really comes down to is that key engineer that took a bet on us and fought internally to get parts through. And it's really about that education piece. And we are willing to help. If you're willing to help open the door for us, we're willing to come in and dedicate resources to make you successful. So, I think that's sort of one of the things for the folks on the phone. And it's not a takeaway, but because I think everyone else is going to take that, but it's more of a call to action.
Yeah, call to action, call to arms. Absolutely. Brian, what about you?
My biggest takeaway is, and I'm new to the additive manufacturing industry. I've only been, I came from Mark Ford from a technology industry, but my biggest takeaway is just to see the rallying cry for additive and how the whole community came together to help in the response to COVID. And I thought that was something that in my time in additive / manufacturing, I'm going to really cherish that. And the biggest takeaway for me from that is just how fast we were able to respond as a whole industry in order to get things in people's hands that were going to make a difference, right? And I think that's what we're all in this for. And that's my biggest takeaway from the last month and a half is how fast this community pulled together and responded to help people out.
Well, that's
so what do you got, Dave?
Well,
Let's wrap this thing up.
My first one is everyone forgets Canada when they're listing off. My Canadian pride was a little bit hurt today, but I'm not going to hold it against people.
Expect to see the Canadian flag as the background in the.
Yeah, it's just going to be Canada paraphernalia behind me the whole time.
Said the guy that lives in San Francisco.
Yeah, don't worry. I love America too. I can pull whatever card I want. The second thing which I love is just materials is number one. I think so many people want to talk about this system, but really, I want to spend more time with our customers educating on materials in additive and really think of it as a tool of not how are you going to do a carbon machine or a Stratasys machine or a Mark Forge, but it's like, what material do you need? And let's find a system that can produce that for you. That was a big takeaway for me.
Yeah.
And then the second one, so I can, do another company is if I want to raise money with VC, I just have to have a vertical approach. So Phil, thank you for that. The key is a vertical or a platform.
It's not just, and I will tell you this, it's not just about the technology. The business model is as important as the technology.
So there we go. That is tips from the trenches. And hey, to both of you guys, just a big thank you for all that you shared and also for the hard work during everything COVID related that you guys really are the MVPs and your entire team. So I speak for all the guests, people that will watch this, just big thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you as well.
Yep. Go Team Additive.
Awesome. Have a great evening, everyone. Good morning for you.
Stay
Phil.
safe.
Be safe.
Yeah.
Well,
be safe.
See you next
Take care,
time in the
guys.
bunker.
Thanks, guys.
Bye for now. Thank you.